Core action value number 1 is authenticity. You know, the greatest triumph of the human spirit is to become the person you're meant to be. And I believe we're all born with some special meant to be. And the greatest tragedy very often is to be very successful at pretending to be somebody else because you think you'll make more money, because you think the pay is higher. I know a guy, and I'm sure you know people like this. He's a high-paid corporate lawyer. He's got all the toys, the big house, the cars, he's got the status. And he's one of the most miserable people I know. He told me he gets up every morning with a knot in his stomach because he's got to go to work doing work that he doesn't like with people he doesn't like. And you know what he'd be really good at? He would be a great third grade teacher. He goes out on the soccer field with those kids when he's coaching. He just comes alive. He loves the kids. They love him. He would be a great teacher. And why won't he quit the job he hates, get a teaching certificate, and become the person he's meant to be? Money and status. And that is really a violation of authenticity, isn't it? Now, we all have to make a living, but trying to figure out who am I meant to be and working toward that person, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey, not a destination. There's no end point. Bobby Carlisle is a sculptor in Colorado, and she did a sculpture called The Self-Made Man. And it's a statue of a man. In one hand he's got a hammer, in the other hand he's got a chisel, and he's carving himself out of a big piece of stone. And isn't that a beautiful metaphor for the process of becoming authentic? Because what it entails is carving away those parts of you that you're not proud of, the parts of you, the lesser self, the parts of you that are intended to please and impress other people, to carve away the weaknesses that you're trying to compensate for, and to build on that inner core, the strengths that you're born with, the you that you're meant to be. And authenticity begins with self-awareness. Socrates said the greatest wisdom of all is to know yourself. That's a hard challenge, isn't it? For one thing, you're a moving target. You're a different person today than you were 5 years ago or maybe even yesterday. You'll be a different person, hopefully a better and stronger person 5 years or 1 year or a week from now. The challenge is, how do you figure out who am I when I'm being my best self? And it often begins with knowing who you think you are, but you're not. And let's look at 4 specific areas. 1, the roles you play. You are not the roles you play. You may be a nurse, you may be a fire person, you may be a salesperson, but that's not you. Those are just roles you play. You're a parent, perhaps, but that's not who you are. That is a role that you play. It's an important part of how you define yourself, but it's not you. What if, instead of the universal icebreaker question, what do? Someone were to say, who are you? And you say, well, I'm a doctor. No, that's a role you play. Who are you? It's an impossible question to answer, but if you can keep asking that, who am I when I'm being my best self? Who am I when I'm being my best self as a parent? My best self managing my time and my money? Who am I when I'm being my best self in these relationships? Just asking that question helps you define who you are, independent from the roles you play. Second, you are not your moods and emotions. David Burns is one of the leaders in the field of cognitive therapy. And in one of his books he said, emotions, negative emotions and bad moods will lie to you. And it's true. If you're in a really bad mood, the world seems very dark. The world is what it is. It hadn't changed. What's different is you. And if you can have the ability to step outside of that, there's really a bad mood there. I'm fine. The world is fine. But this bad mood is it's like bad weather moving through. But it's not you. Third thing, you're not what other people think of you. A friend of mine says, you'll worry a lot less about what other people think of you if you will acknowledge to yourself how infrequently other people think of you. And yet, how many of us, our spending is defined by keeping up with the Joneses, worrying about status. Our relationships are defined by too much worry about what other people think of us. You are not the opinions of other people. And finally, you are, and this is the most important one, you are not that little voice in the back of your head. We all have a little voice, often a toxic negative voice. Psychologists tell us that about 80% of human self-talk is negative. And you're not that voice. And here's the challenge for you. Pay attention. Anytime you hear that little voice in the back of your head, and you know, sometimes that voice will talk to you in ways you'd never tolerate from anybody else, it will always be in the second person. You'll never hear that voice say, Joe, I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm not good enough. No, it's always in the second person. Joe, you're fat, dumb, stupid, ugly. You aren't good enough. And why is that? It's not you talking. What you are hearing is a toxic, malignant echo of something somebody said to you a long time ago. It hurt, it stuck, and now it is plastered up there in the walls of your mind. It's like graffiti. It's like mental graffiti. It's a malignant echo. And here's one of the tools that we'll share with you. It's a very simple game, but it can be life-changing. We call it the janitor in your attic. Every time you get negative self-talk, that little voice says, oh, you can't do that, oh, you're not good enough, or they don't like you. Visualize it for what it is, mental graffiti. I have another friend who says, be careful who you rent space in your head to, and don't let the little vandals up there to paint the walls with graffiti. You're a loser, you're fat, you're ugly. It's mental graffiti. That's not you. It's just you're hearing an echo of what someone else said to you a long time ago. And then create a cartoon character of a janitor, the janitor in your attic. My janitor is named Spike. I literally have this visual picture of a cartoon character. He wears coveralls, he's got a little cap, a little bow tie. And whenever I get negative self-talk, I visualize my janitor Spike coming along with a cart full of paint, painting it out, and replacing it with something that is more positive, affirmative, and nurturing, and frankly, more likely to be true. And if I can pay attention to that positive affirmation, it helps me change my attitude about myself. It helps me change my behaviors. And when I change my behaviors, I get better outcomes, and that helps make that what might have felt like an untrue positive affirmation become true. I'll tell you, years ago, I read a book on brain plasticity. And remember in the introductory video, I talked about how when you change your thinking, when you change your self-talk, it can actually have a positive physical impact on the hardwiring of your brain. I read a book about this some years ago, and I got so excited I called the author. He's one of the world's leading experts in the field of brain plasticity. And we talked for a while, and I told him about this little game that I play and I teach other people, the janitor in your attic. And I asked this, I said, if somebody really did this in good faith, every time they got negative self-talk, they stopped, took a deep breath, visualized this janitor painting it out and replacing it with something that said something very different, is it possible they would actually change the wiring in their brain to wire out negative self-talk? You know what he said? He said it's not just possible, it's inevitable. He said something that neurobiologists talk about. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, at a physiological level, it's a chemical reaction in your brain. Two synapses are connecting. That's what he said. And he said, when you stop thinking a thought, like any other muscle, that connection begins to atrophy. And you replace it with something else, the neurons that fire together. Every time you say to yourself, not I'm a loser, but I'm a winner, it creates like any other exercise, it creates a stronger connection. That call was probably 7-8 years ago, and since then I've been much more serious about nurturing my janitor, and I'm now convinced from my own personal experience and from what I hear from other people that he was right. Here's a couple of other tools that can help you with the journey of self-awareness. One is simply write in a journal. The late Stephen Covey said, writing in a journal is a high leverage, what he called quadrant 2 activity, meaning that it's important but not urgent. Right? And we give you, one of the tools that we give you with this course is our journal, 360 Days to Change Your Life. And we've given you some questions to ask to help spark your journal thinking. And here can be one of the most life-changing questions you can ask yourself when it comes to authenticity. What would you do if every job paid the same and had the same social status? You could be anything you wanted to be. How you answer that question is a guide to who are you meant to be? Who's your authentic self? And there are two follow-up questions. One, chances are whatever your answer is, you can't just quit what you're doing now and start doing that because you got to make a living. But how can you bring some of that meant to be into what you're doing now? I worked with a nurse once. She said, I am meant to be a poet. I love to write poetry, but I make my living as a nurse. I'm a good nurse. I'm proud of what I do. I love what I do, but I love to write poetry. What she does, she writes poems for her patients. She writes poems for her coworkers. That is bringing her meant to be self into the real world job that she does. And second question, how can you build a bridge from where you are to who you want to be? Great role model in my life in this regard is my dad. My dad was a career Air Force officer. He was very proud of that. He was very dedicated to his service, but he also loved art. And every night he'd be home out in the garage in his studio painting, and his paintings went from okay to acceptable to excellent. And by the time he retired from the Air Force, he was so good, he was able to start another career as a professional artist. See, he built a bridge. It took a while, it took a lot of work, but he built a bridge to who he wanted to be in his next iteration as a human on this earth. The second cornerstone of authenticity is self-mastery. Have you ever said or done something you later regretted? Have you ever found yourself procrastinating, putting off doing something important? Ever had buyer's remorse? If you didn't raise your hand for that, we will have a remedial course on honesty later. But if you raised your hand for any one of those questions, take your right hand, put it in front of your face like this, palm out and thumb down. Other hand, palm in, thumb up. Bring your two hands together and shake hands with your own worst enemy. And isn't it true? We become our own worst enemies when we're not being authentic. And one of the tools that we'll share in the workbook is the iron triangle of false personality. Ego, emotion, ambition. Those are good things in the abstract. You've got to have a strong ego or you just sort of go with the flow. Without emotions, you're not human. And without ambition, you'd still be hunting and gathering. The challenge is, how do you manage your ego so that it doesn't cause you to be your own worst enemy? How do you manage your emotions so you don't react in ways that you later regret? And how do you make sure that you're pursuing authentic ambitions? And I'll tell you this, you hear the word tough love? The one person in your life who needs tough love more than anybody is the person you see in the mirror every morning. And I want to be very clear, when I say tough love, I'm talking about being tough with yourself by holding yourself up to high standards and expectations, but not being tough on yourself by beating yourself up if you don't always live up to those, because you won't always. Daniel Goleman has written several books on emotional intelligence. And one of the things that he talks about that you should do is something you learned in kindergarten. Stop, look, and listen. You know, before you react, to make sure that your ego's not getting in the way, to make sure you're not pursuing inauthentic ambitions, to make sure you're not falling into what he calls an emotional hijacking, stop, take a deep breath, and really pay attention to what's going on inside and outside. And just that simple thing can help you not be your own worst enemy. By the way, one more thing. If you want to achieve a higher level of self-mastery, one thing you might have to do is change what sociologists call your reference group. And that's just a fancy term for who do you spend most of your time with? Because over time, you're going to be a lot like those people. And if you're spending most of your time with people who are always complaining, always whining, who nothing's ever good enough, always talking about other people, it's going to be very hard for you to not be like that. And if you want to change who you are, if you want to become more authentic, one of the things you might need to do is reach out and make new friends in new settings. Maybe join a service club, maybe go to a different church, maybe have to change where you work. But if you want to change who you are, sometimes you have to change who you hang around with. The third cornerstone of authenticity is self-belief. You got to believe in yourself. And I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about arrogance. Arrogance is not self-belief, quite to the contrary. Arrogant people very often are hiding an inferiority complex by stepping on other people. I'm talking about really believing in yourself. You know, the Bible asks the question, who'd light a candle and put a basket over it? And yet that's something that all of us on occasion, sometimes many occasions, do. You've probably heard the quote by Marianne Williamson from her book, Return to Love, which was made famous by Nelson Mandela in his inaugural address. And she said, our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. And we tend to cover that up because of that fear. And you have to take the basket off of that candle. Let your inner light shine. Don't cheat yourself by settling for anemic dreams and goals. Don't cheat us by not giving us your very best. And one of the tools to help you do that is the pyramid of self-belief. 4 levels. Self-concept. What's your vision of the world around you? Do you see a world of abundance and opportunity, or do you see a world of scarcity and risk? You can make a case for either one, but what you choose to consciously focus on will have a huge impact on the assumptions you make about yourself and your ability to get things done. Self-image. What do you see when you look in the mirror? Do you see yourself as a winner? Do you see yourself as a victim or a loser? Over time, you will never exceed what you see when you look in the mirror. If you want to change your circumstances in life, whether it's your income, the job you're doing, anything about your life, one of the first things you're going to have to do is be able to look in the mirror, metaphorically, and see that person looking back at you. You want to be a successful author? You have to believe you're capable and deserving of being a successful author. And that gets me to that 3rd block on our pyramid, self-esteem. Do you like what you see when you look in the mirror? Very often, low self-esteem is nothing more than an excuse. It's an excuse for laziness and cowardice. Oh, they'd probably reject me, so I won't even ask to be included. Oh, I'd probably fail, so I won't even try. And you have to see low self-esteem for what it is. It is an excuse that wants to keep you in that little confined space you're in now. And you have to be willing to stand up to it, talk back to it, and walk through it. And finally, the 4th block on the pyramid is self-confidence. Do you feel like you have the resources you need to deal with the challenges of your life, to pursue the opportunities that are important to you? And here's the secret. Very often, if you want to change your life, the place to start is up there at the top. Let's take a simple, practical example that many people are very familiar with today, and that is being over your head in debt. You could start at the bottom by visualizing abundance. It's probably not a bad thing to do. But what you really ought to do is go down to the bookstore and get Dave Ramsey's book, The Total Money Makeover, or something like that. Do what he tells you to do and get yourself out of debt. And as you do, your self-esteem goes up. Your self-image becomes more positive, and you start to see the opportunities in the world around you. If you're struggling in relationships, get a book, talk to a counselor, take a class, build your self-confidence. It'll ripple through everything else. And our 4th cornerstone in authenticity is self-truth. You know, Shakespeare said, be true to yourself, you'll never be false to anybody else. And it's true. You've got to start by being true to yourself. And here's a simple check. Well, I talk to people a lot about their values. So I say, tell me what your values are, and they tell me. And then I say, okay, show me your checkbook and your calendar. And which one do you think tells me more about what their values really are? And just go back through your checkbook. Go back through your calendar for the last 3 months or so. And ask yourself, is the way I'm spending my time a real, authentic reflection of my values? Is the way I'm spending my money a reflection of who I want to be, of how I'm living my values? And let me wrap up with 2 tools that you're going to see throughout this course. One is the Self-Empowerment Pledge. 7 simple promises that will change your life. One for each day of the week. And if you take those promises to heart on responsibility, accountability, determination, contribution, resilience, perspective, and faith, you take those values to heart, it will help you do a much better job of living your values, achieving your goals and dreams, and becoming the authentic person you're meant to be. And the second tool is the DDQ. And don't get your hopes up, Dairy Queen's not going to come in with dilly bars. DDQ is the direction deflection question. And it's a very simple question that is infinitely adaptable. Is what I'm about to do or say going to help me be my ideal best self? And that's really 3 questions in one, isn't it? Question number 1, who am I when I'm being my best self? What does my best self do as a parent? What does my best self do as a manager? How does my best self make priorities about time or spending money? Second question, is what I'm about to do right now going to help me be that person that I've defined as my best self? And then the third question, if the answer to the second question is no, not really, what would my best self do in this situation? And you'll hear an answer. And here's a hint. If you ask that question, is what I'm about to do or say right now going to help me be my best self? If you don't hear no a whole lot more than you hear yes, you're probably not being honest with yourself. Why? Because it's human nature to take the easy path, the path of least resistance. It's human nature to do the easy thing. It is easier to put a donut in your mouth than it is to go to the gym. And if you stop and say, what would I do if I were being my best self? You'll hear that little voice, put down the donut and go to the gym. And if you can get yourself to do the things you've heard that voice telling you to do, you act your way into being that best self. And it's infinitely adaptable. Is what I'm about to spend my hard-earned cash on going to help me achieve my goal of being debt-free and financially independent? That's one of my students showed me, she wrote that question, and it helped her become debt-free and financially independent. Is what I'm about to put in my mouth going to help me achieve my ideal body weight? It is whatever it is you're struggling with, whatever goal you want to achieve, write a DDQ. And then on the back of your hand in the morning, you can actually with a pen write DDQ as a reminder to help you ask that question throughout the day. It is one of the tools, the hammer and the chisel, that you can use to become your best self. Now, we've been talking about core action value number 1, authenticity, defining who you are when your best self. In our next course, our next class, we'll talk about core action value number 2, integrity. And as much as anything, integrity is you taking the actions to be that best self. I'll see you then.